Before we start, I'd like to thank our partners Teva UK who have sponsored this podcast, enabling us to further our mission to support the well-being of our pharmacy family. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of A Dose of Wellbeing, the Pharmacist Support Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Cochran, Wellbeing and Development Manager at Pharmacist Support, the profession's independent charity. We're delighted to bring you inspiring stories, tips, and expert insights that can enhance your well-being and make a positive impact in your professional life. This podcast is all about supporting you, our pharmacy family, as you navigate the challenges of the profession. Today, we're kicking off with an incredible guest, Uzo Ibechukwu, Director of Pharmacy at Royal United Hospital Bath and Integrated Care System, and Chief Pharmacist at Bath and Northeast Somerset Integrated Care Board. Uzo is a true leader when it comes to championing workplace well-being. He believes that implementing a plan around people, culture, health, and well-being is the single most important part of any clinical strategy. And the most valuable role of any leader in healthcare is to create an environment where people feel safe to be themselves, to have ambitions and goals outside the tried and tested, and to support them to surpass the leader themselves. I first met Uzo at an RPS Workplace Wellbeing Action Group meeting where his passion for workplace well-being really struck a chord with me. I was so impressed by the work he's doing in Bath, work that aligns so closely with what we aim to achieve at the charity through our own workplace well-being initiatives. I knew we had to get him on the podcast and share his experiences and insights with you all. So, without further ado, Uzo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Uzo, let's start at the beginning. What first sparked your interest in workplace well-being? Was it something that happened, or was it something that kind of gradually developed over time? How did you get into it?
Okay, so I think looking at what we're doing in RUH Bath, this systematic approach that we have now built up over time, and I think coming here, I need to pay credit to the team that I'm now lucky to lead. So what started with a vision, with the right recruitment and building the right senior team around me has enabled us to take a much more systematic approach to this. So going back to purely on a human level, you look after your staff and they'll look after you. I feel we came to this with a view to change our culture and develop our culture into a place where we look after the individual, not just the worker, fully recognizing that people have to be their true selves really to bring that high quality care that we aspire to for our patients. So the well-being approach that we currently take, I think, is a natural progression from trying to build a culture of continuous improvement. And that was actually the starting point. The ideas for well-being and improvement came from people putting forward their ideas for improvement of the workplace. And so when you think about it, again, how do you need healthy staff to look after your patients in the best way? You need healthy staff who are able to bring themselves and their ideas to work. You need an inclusive workplace. So all of these things, taking that view where you take a measuring for improvement approach to developing health and well-being, not just from a reactive point of view and, the loudest personality gets their way, but actually taking on feedback, taking on ideas. So at the base of it, we're trying to support our staff. The methodology through which we do so is based on quality improvement. And that's the more structural approach that we take.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's quite unusual because you talked about the person bringing their whole selves. Like you're not talking about a person just as a worker.
Absolutely.
When I hear you talking about that, it sounds to me like you really mean the person and all that they are.
Absolutely. And there's no way to get. I mentioned inclusion and creating that inclusive workplace. I'm Nigerian, and I have my very loud Nigerian laugh. I bring everything about myself to work, both I suppose good and not so good. And you need a workplace where people feel able to bring themselves. Where you create that culture where people are able to call out behaviors that don't align to values, where we understand the need for what diversity brings to teams. And yes, it's one thing to recognize that, it's quite another thing to build a workplace and an approach where we basically encourage people to bring these things in with them, because with that diversity and difference in worldview, what you see is creativity, what you see is different ways of approaching the same issues, which you absolutely need for like basically any workplace, really. So that I find it's really, really important to look out for the whole person, not just the healthcare professional.
That's great. Thank you. When you first stepped into the role as chief pharmacist, what were some of the key things you wanted to tackle, particularly when it comes to workplace well-being?
You need a culture where people are able to speak up first and foremost. So, recognizing that this was an area that we could improve, for me, that was the first thing to try to approach. And so despite the difficulties of the period, I tried to have a one-to-one with every single member of staff, just trying to understand what their experience of this workplace had been, what their experience of access to leadership, what their experience of suggesting ideas and seeing those ideas come to fruition was. And that is the foundation that you build everything else up from. You need to build a workplace where there's trust to begin with. And I think that was time really, really well invested in my view. And what happened in that, in there, getting people to understand that if you can't speak to me, if you can't speak to your line manager, speak to Freedom to Speak Up, speak to HR, speak to your union, speak to someone, because it's more important to bring the issues to light and then address them structurally than it is to, suppress them and build resentment. So, as a chief pharmacist, that was the first thing to do. Trying to build trust, trying to build a common sense of direction, overlaying that with a culture of continuous improvement. And while these might seem like hypothetical, these might seem like concepts, they're things that you have to build buy-in to from the start. Otherwise, everything over them just feels a bit tokenistic after all, unless you do that bit right.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really wanted to focus on a sense of safety in the workplace.
Absolutely.
So that people can come forward if there's an issue rather than feeling that they have to sit on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I cannot stress
really important.
Cannot stress how important that is. And that's not to say that as a leadership team we get everything right. Of course we don't. Got more things wrong than I care to count. It's the common knowledge and the trust that when you don't get things right, that you'll put your hands up and say, what could I have done better? And that's, as the head of department and chief pharmacist, any other member of staff, I'm held to account just like everyone else. And it's important that everybody feels that you hold yourself and your leadership team to the same standards as you hold everyone else. So I when I look at over the last 4 or 5 years, I feel that that's been the biggest shift. Not to say that it's perfect, and one of the things I say continuously is, we never aim for perfection, just improvement. Let's improve the small things, and in time, it'll just feel like a better place to work.
Yeah, that's great. One thing that I said in one of the workshops I delivered is don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Absolutely.
It's not mine. I got it from somewhere, but I do really like that quote. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's worth acknowledging that in a profession that culturally has gotten itself to a place where perfection is the goal.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a straightforward cultural shift.
Yeah.
And people need to see situations being managed from we're not blaming the individual, we're blaming the system and the environment in which, not blaming, but it's looking at the environment and the structure in which the individual made that error rather than trying to move to blame the individual. And people need to see that play out multiple times before they actually trust all these things that we're trying to get them to buy into.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. What do you think of the practices that you've implemented since you've been in post, what do you think has made the greatest impact?
Ooh.
Or could you single one out, or what do you think?
To anyone from my workplace that might be looking at this, I have to mention milk at some point. And the story of milk I have told a million times up to now. But I would say the biggest single change was implementing an improvement board. And it might sound straightforward. Lots and lots and lots of organizations do this. They're just part of the direction of travel of the NHS. However, an improvement board on its own makes no difference. It's the environment and the sense of that psychologically safe space that an improvement board is implemented into. So there's groundwork to be done before then. And when I look at when that was implemented, beginning of 2022 versus now, I think that enabled a lot of other things. That enabled that cultural shift in the department, that visible cultural shift in the department, to everyone feeling that they had a voice, and that whatever ideas they suggested would be taken forward. And so things that have gone on there have ranged from the operational or the seemingly trivial, like milk, to things around staff morale and inclusion and exclusion, really uncomfortable conversations, to things like weekend rotas and stuff like that. So the biggest move was a structural one. And now when I look at where we are now versus where we were then, now you have, it basically runs itself and it's part of who we are, for better or for worse. The things where we don't get things right, we own up, we move back. Where we do get them right, we celebrate and everyone's happy.
Yeah.
But yes, as I said, I will mention milk. And yes, the first ticket that we got through was free milk, which it's one of those where, as anyone who's worked in any workplace with everyone bringing in their own milk that then goes off in the back of the fridge, and you know, everyone gets annoyed about it, stinks the tea room out for ages.
Yeah.
When I look back, I learned a personal lesson from that as well, because at that point in time, I had all sorts of grand visions for where we're taking the department, where we're taking pharmacy, and transforming things. And that really showed me, in terms of that hierarchy of needs, what the things were that you had to get right first. Otherwise, the rest just did not matter, or it was difficult to buy into those bigger picture things. So what started small, I'd say the milk was the pebble that started the avalanche. People actually saw that was the first idea that someone had put on there, had been moved through the board, had been implemented, that we had celebrated.
Right.
And that just showed that it could be done. And those were the baby steps. And
well, the milk it's a really tangible one.
It is.
Like,
it is.
You make the change. Everyone can see it.
Absolutely.
You can touch it, see it,
absolutely.
smell it. It's
absolutely.
a very real, tangible thing. Yeah.
And
so that makes sense.
Yeah. A similar one was, we ended up getting a new fridge. And I know I'm just talking about things that might seem trivial, but they're absolutely not. In creating, in not only helping people feel they're listened to, but walking people through the process of the decision making, the improving outcomes. And sometimes where there are things, and I'm quite honest about that, especially given the challenging situation the NHS finds itself in, there are things that we cannot do. And when those come, you say, we cannot do this because X, Y, Z. What is important is the accountability.
Yeah.
What is important is that visibility and transparency of decision making. And so, yes, we might be talking to things like, milk and really, really like tiny things, but we might also be talking about things that impact on people's work-life balance. And those are really big things. Same principles apply. Openness, decision making, co-creation, those are the things that matter.
That's great. That's really good to know. And so every idea can face resistance. Did you encounter any pushback when you started introducing these well-being initiatives? And
absolutely.
If so, what was that like, and how did you overcome it?
Absolutely. And I don't think this is something you can ever overcome, because again, there is always the balance of, we have services, we are providing services at the end of the day for members of the public who are our families, our staff, and there's no getting away from it that there is a balance, not even a balance to be struck, but you need to be able to ask yourself questions about any unforeseen impact of what you're doing on the care that we're here to provide patients. And for me, that's where really measuring for improvement comes in. Being the most frustrating thing that many of my team who say, we need this to fix this, I always ask, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the measurable problem that you're trying to solve? Because that measurement and openness about what you're trying to improve and willingness to admit when you haven't improved it, that's the bit that gets the buy-in or not. And sometimes despite that, obviously people won't buy in. Sometimes that will be enough. But again, it's that openness to challenge, being willing to have the conversation, working through your different stakeholders, all the different steps of quality improvement, really. There will always be resistance. There will be people who feel that, workplace well-being has nothing to do. You leave all your problems at the door when you walk in. Personally, I just think that's not a way to build a healthy workplace, to be perfectly honest. And looking long-term, looking structurally, you recruit from a recruitment point of view. You recruit for values. You recruit for people who share those values about looking after staff and ensuring that your workplace is fit for the future. Because purely from a selfish employer point of view, all of this is 100% linked to recruitment, retention, turnover, engagement, all the things that we present as a challenge to the workplace, to the workforce in pharmacy at the moment. If we don't look after our staff, we will not keep our staff. Our staff will not, as I said at the RPS, there's no point in having a clinical strategy without a workforce strategy. And within that workforce strategy, there has to be inclusion. There has to be, a strategic view to how you improve workplace well-being. Otherwise, the staff that you have won't want to be there and nobody else wants to join you either.
So in terms of dealing with pushback and resistance, it sounds like you had a two-pronged approach. So one was you needed to bring people along with you who are already employed, but then also in recruiting, you were bringing in maybe the kind of people who share the same values, and they can then also bring people along. So you're really taking it from, addressing it from both directions.
Absolutely. And again, when I look at some of the experiences of colleagues in many organizations that have tried to take on some of this work themselves, I feel sometimes that when you're a lone person doing what is right, let's be honest, but without a clear buy-in and ownership of the underlying issues by the leadership within the team, you're basically setting up people to fail. So while I don't believe in top-down management for everything, I'm very, very much, I very much see the role of bottom-up innovation and improvement. I think that what is key in all of this as well is almost like a commitment by the senior leadership and team. And I see that as my role. What do I see as my role? Is to create an environment. My job is to create the environment where people do their best. And part of doing their best is creating an environment where people feel able to come to work, be themselves, suggest ideas, take those ideas, and are given the tools to take those ideas through. So yes, while we do that, there is something about knowing what sort of individual we want to recruit, making sure that people have the protected time to do this work, giving them that steer and direction where these are big pieces of work. So that it's not just people doing all this off their own backs while trying to do their own day jobs. And again, one of my favorite things, which I got from a colleague who was previously as well the head of QI in Oxford. Everyone has two jobs. One is to do their day job, and the other is to improve the work environment around them. And I really do believe that. But to do that, you need to make sure people have the tools and the time to do it. I love that. And we say that as well, that well-being, it needs to come from the top. Absolutely. Because people aren't going to feel comfortable to take care of themselves if they see that their leadership aren't. If they're being told you can take a lunch, but they see senior leaders, working through their lunch, it's not really setting the example that it's okay to go out and have a walk. And, we talk about that kind of thing as well. And again, I'd love to say here that I do that 100% of the time, that I
Right.
take every
Yeah,
lunch
yeah.
break, and I don't. And I find myself, the phrase I use more and more is that on balance. You
Yeah.
do it more and more often than you don't. And, there'll never be one light bulb day where everything is fantastic. It's just, there's a direction of travel that everyone can see that you're on. And, sometimes you'll have to take steps back. Sometimes things won't go to plan. But it's, again, that collective buy-in that this is where we're going. We're not there yet, but that's the direction of travel.
Yeah.
And so, just I feel that piece around bringing the right people in is just as important, and making it clear from day one what behaviors and values matter in that workplace, and holding yourself and your people to them is really important.
So if you were talking to someone who wanted to make changes in the workplace, to do with well-being culture and make it a healthier place to work, what kind of advice would you have to them if they were facing some resistance, or how can they maybe help to convince others that it's a worthwhile investment to look at well-being in the workplace?
To a fellow senior leader, head of department, etc., I'd be saying, make sure that you frame this in terms of your strategic direction of travel. Be aware that this is going to take time, because whatever reality you want to move away from is the reality for people based on the experiences that they have had up to now. Telling them it's different will not change anything. They need to see small changes in behavior consistently. For how long, you don't know. And you also need to be willing to call yourself and your peers out on when those behaviors are not being met. I've owned things like your staff survey, for instance. Your staff survey are the staff who feel able to telling you things. Listen to them.
Yeah.
If the NHS staff survey is quite, for me, it's such a useful tool, because every single thing about you tells you something. If people respond, it tells you something. If people don't respond, you need to ask yourself why. Not just because they don't have anything better to do. It tends to be they don't believe their voice matters, or they feel like they'll be identified, or something. Everything about every survey tells you something. And from a leadership point of view, it's important that you commit to owning those issues. You won't be able to fix everything overnight. Understand what bits you are going to try to improve. I need to stop using the word fix, because if anything was easily fixable, it would be fixed already. So it's that understanding, direction of travel, commitment to improvement that matters more than anything.
Yeah.
To a senior lead in there, I would always say, start small, build your network, your support network, because I've been in places and I've been that senior lead, and it can be incredibly isolating when you're going to challenge your peers who, let's be honest, our culture in pharmacy is this way for a reason, and it's not anything that anyone is going to go and change overnight. So building a network, often outside of pharmacy, because too often when I say we, I mean we in the profession, think there is something special about our problems, and there really isn't. And there is evidence for every single intervention we might want to try in pharmacy from somewhere else, or another country, or another industry. And being willing to go out there, find good evidence, take a PDSA improvement type approach to it, and also being quite clear on what you see as the problems that you're trying to solve. Those are, I think, quality improvements which most organizations are trying to embed in practice, really give a good foundation from which to test ideas, gain stakeholder engagement, and move changes through. Obviously, at the same time, try to get your leadership buy-in. As a newly qualified professional who feels like everyone is just there to tell you what to do and you don't have any time, I would always say, like, that investment in transferable skills right from the start is absolutely critical. I feel that pharmacy professionals, the best thing we can do for them is invest in them so that they see the wider world rather than just the tunnel vision of what we do on a day-to-day basis, because the tools that you need to navigate the new world are important wherever you are, and help you see things in a new light. So similar to what I would say to middle grade professionals, if you like, small improvements. Take your time to master the techniques and the tools. And I think I often say to people who go for interviews, regardless of what level you go to, they're going to ask you exactly the same interview questions. And one of them will be, tell me about something that you've improved in the workplace. The questions they might ask with different words, but the questions are the same. And so there is something about taking your time to invest in your transferable skills, looking after yourself, because the work will never be finished. And it's a marathon, not a sprint, your career. So taking the time to invest in knowledge, and here I am speaking as someone who sits in an acute trust and is very, very aware of the inequities of access to training that we see across the different sectors in pharmacy, and that's something that we absolutely cannot avoid. But it's something that we all have collective responsibility to do something about. And I might come to the role of integrated care boards later, but at every point, the key thing is, whether it's in the strategic direction of travel, whether it's in the day-to-day direction of travel, speaking the same language about improvement, trying to understand and utilize the tools available to you, building networks, and looking after yourself.
That's really inspiring. And I wonder what kind of feedback you've had from your team as you've implemented these things. And also, I wonder how it's impacted engagement and productivity, if you have anything to share about that.
Okay, I'll take the second first.
Okay.
So in terms, and I'll talk to the staff survey for a bit. And I know that it's not perfect as a tool for measuring engagement, but your typical pharmacy department will have a staff survey response rate of about 45 to 55%.
Okay.
And so what that says is that 45% of your staff respond to your staff survey. It will tend to be about that. Ours has grown from 50% like everyone else, to 83% last year and 86% this year.
Wow.
And the key improvement there is a number of people who feel that they're able to make a change in the workplace and that their voice matters. For better or for worse, there are things in there that made less than pleasant reading, but I absolutely own that as head of department. But that for me is the single most pleasing quantitative output from the work that we're doing, because the richness of ideas that have come from that engagement, it's representative, it's a diverse view. So that you're not just catering to the needs of a majority of people who responded previously. So in terms, and I again absolutely recognize that a quantitative measure like that is not it, but in terms of engagement, huge.
Great.
Qualitative, the thing I'm most pleased about is how many people say this place feels different.
Okay.
And you don't measure that. It's not going to go on your CV. It's not going to go on your CPD.
Yeah.
But that feels different. And I reflect on a conversation that I had with one of with a lead in my department quite recently. And we'd been talking about a course that they were possibly going to do. And he said, you know what, I'm thinking my partner and I want to have another baby, and I think, I'm going to pause this for a while we do that. And their reflection on that conversation was, and it feels fantastic to be in a workplace where I know I can say that and it's not going to have any impact on my career, which is another thing about pharmacy that that needs to be improved. So I've had lots and lots of feedback, and on balance, as I say again, most of it positive, and it leaves room for improvement, but that's absolutely what you want.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really, really good. And I think this kind of follows on from that in a way, and that at the charity we're really concerned about burnout in the profession. In the joint survey we do at the RPS every year, the numbers are consistently really high. I think last year was at 86% of pharmacists were at risk of burnout. And I just wondered, is that something that you see in your professional life? And if so, what are you doing? I suppose all of this would make a difference for
Absolutely.
burnout, but is there anything else that you'd like to talk about that can help with burnout?
So, first of all, the fact that we're having a conversation about burnout is fantastic. I think there's a recognition that this is a real and present danger, and hiding our heads in the sand, thinking that we just need to get more people in and this will all go away, totally ignores the fact that there are underlying cultural and structural issues that make this remain a problem. There was a quote I read somewhere that trying to out-recruit a retention or burnout issue is like trying to light a fire with 50-pound notes. And quite simply, you have got to make the underlying changes. Otherwise, you'll see the same losses from our profession. You'll see the burnout and the apathy that comes with that.
Yeah.
So I think from a workplace point of view, and again, bearing in mind that I recognize I am talking with an acute hat on, but I will talk about wider pharmacy in a bit. There is something about recognizing what is within our gift and recognizing that we can't change everything. There's no point setting people up to do 100% of the work 100% of the time. And the role of senior leadership is to support those conversations to happen. And protect is probably the wrong word, but as you mentioned there, don't let perfect become the enemy of good.
Yeah.
What can we what services can we sustainably provide? And I recognize the politics that come with, rowing back from services. I recognize I've had many of those difficult conversations, and I'm not going to sit here and say that they're easy. But that's where your leadership comes in, basically knowing your business and supporting your staff within that.
Yeah.
So trying to achieve 100% of everything every day, that way lies burnout. I feel, again, looking at the wider system and across multiple sectors, and now thinking with my ICS chief pharmacist hat on, there is no version of pharmacy's vision for the future that is deliverable without a healthy community pharmacy sector and general practice. Yeah. Because increasingly those two, actually, community pharmacy has always been the face of pharmacy. Whatever we in hospitals might think, that's always been the face of pharmacies to the public, and increasingly general practice. But the thing that they both have in common is that there is a lot of solo working, and that isolation that I spoke about earlier can really hit you there. In acutes, yes, there is a huge amount of work and growing amount of work, but you have more of a safety in numbers. So, I feel that integrated care boards, provided there is the basis of trust across the senior leaderships, across the different sectors in an ICB, and that needs to be worked on. But with integrated care boards, we do have an opportunity here to really, support community pharmacy and general practice, our colleagues in those sectors, because ultimately we need to support, we need those vibrant and healthy for the good of all of us, because they are the face of everything that's being spoken about in every long-term plan. So, what are the structural things in this place? More by way of rotations or portfolio posts, and really understanding what our workforce want and need.
Yeah.
Access to learning, I come to that a lot because, as again I mentioned earlier, there are structural inequities, if you like, of access to training, and I think there is a role here for the haves, if you want to use that relative, I know, but the haves to support those who haven't. If you have how do acute support community pharmacy and general practice to improve access to learning, because that's one of the things that retains your engagement and your passion for your profession. And lastly, I also feel that in terms of, I started as, I'm still a pharmacist, yes, but I had to go and get myself line manager training. because it wasn't recognized as what needed to be done. And quite simply, there needs to be a more deliberate move to see understanding how to look after our staff and leadership development as part of what we do. Otherwise, as a profession, I think we'll get left behind, and with a disenfranchised and disengaged workforce as well. So those are the three things I can think of off the top of my head. But there is no one thing that will sort burnout out, and there is a real underlying cultural issue that contributes to it that we need to move away from.
It's really interesting, and you touched on training for management there, which is actually where I was kind of going to go next. So you very intuitively have brought us there. But so we've developed a training called Embracing a Workplace Wellbeing Culture for pharmacy managers and leaders. And through the development of that course, we've found that a lot of managers and leaders want to help, but they don't know where to start or what to do. And I wondered if you've seen that in your life, your working life, and if so, if you have any tips or experiences to share with a leader who wants to get started but doesn't have a clue where to start.
Now, I wish I could sit here and talk to every pharmacy manager in every sector, but I can't. And I will use an N equals 1. And again, this is where I think the beauty of the staff survey was. So in our 2022 staff survey, so that would have been published 2023, what came back loud and clear was that, yes, staff felt that the voices were being heard, but line management was an issue. And it's just from a point of view, and obviously it's a very general phrase. And so we basically took a view that we were going to put line management training in place for every new line manager, refreshers for those in post. And it's from point of view of understanding the basics. So I recognize that, for instance, all the thought processes that go through going to ask for a flexible working request or extended time off, you've had those conversations in your mind. The doubts have already crept in, and the last thing you want is to go to a line manager that doesn't know how to support you or tells you without looking at anything that that's going to be rejected. And so there is something about, we've got to put the time into equipping our line managers to do their jobs. Otherwise, we're basically setting them up to fail. And that, just as thinking as I'm speaking here, but that extends to a whole system approach. And so here again, I feel there is something about all the people in senior leadership across ICBs recognizing that this is the same problem for all of them, and they all have to have joint ownership. And out of, say, access training, and the second thing will be networks, building your networks. And then coming back to something I said earlier, it's not it doesn't have to be just pharmacy. So every ICB will have some form of strategic workforce group. They will have and in that strategic workforce group will be lots of professionals with a HR background, lots of professionals who are struggling with the exact same staffing issues that we are. Access a network. And if you're lucky, it will be within your profession or your department. If not, it will be in another organization or a different profession. And the single most important thing to do first is, try and access some training, build a network, and test yourself. Try out those things, because that's how you develop. I think the fear of getting things wrong often stops us from doing anything at all. So I feel that almost like helping, our role again as senior leaders is helping people understand that it's all right to get it wrong sometimes. You're not going to be, you'll be supported even when you don't. And it's the willingness to learn new approaches that's probably the most important part of the process. And so, again, personal reflection on my career, most of the things I've learned through trial and error. And I think my reflection is, how do I, now that I'm in a position to actually influence these changes to happen, how do I try to get enough of the structural things in place so that we can ensure that basically fewer people coming after me make those same errors? And that's the role of every senior leader. That should be the role of every senior leader. Okay,
that's great. Well, this has been a really enlightening conversation, and it's been really great having you here. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for being a part of our very first Pharmacist Support podcast. We hope our listeners are feeling inspired to bring about positive changes in their own workplaces. If today's podcast has resonated with you, you'll find further well-being information, videos, and online content on our website, including details of our Embracing a Workplace Well-being Culture course for pharmacy managers, leaders, and supervisors, and our Act Now Wellbeing campaign. So for further information on our support services, please click on the How We Can Help link in the podcast description. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you feel you may need support. We want to continue providing our free and confidential support services and to open up conversations like this to ensure that no one in our pharmacy family faces challenging times alone. And as an independent charity, we rely on donations from individuals and organizations across the profession to enable us to do this. So if you're in a position to do so, please consider making a donation today. You can find a QR code in the show's description at the end of the video. Donations help us to provide our essential services, including counseling and peer support, financial assistance, and more. So thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next podcast when we'll be discussing nutrition and mental well-being, the gut and mind connection. And thanks again, Uzo, for coming. It's been really brilliant having you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It really has.